Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our event on eradicating the tensions, maximizing the potential of persons with disabilities through technology and employment. I welcome all our viewers on YouTube and all our guests and presenters who are right here with us on Zoom. Today, we're particularly important to have with us. Well, first, I should introduce myself. I am Lisa Vassiani, an Associate Dean in the Faculty of Social Sciences at the University of the West Indies, Bono. Today, I represent our Dean, Professor David Tennant, who is unable to be with us today, but who gives his support to this function, his full support to this function. We welcome as well Ambassador Aubrey Webson, Senator Dr. Floyd Morris, my colleague and friend, Miss Gloria Goff, Dr. Armstrong Alexis. We have a tight schedule today and are really honored that we have these esteemed guests with us to share. The importance of today's event occurs on the backdrop of statistics that show us that within the Caribbean region, persons with disabilities are being severely challenged in terms of accessing employment. This is not a statistic that remains in textbooks or on someone's shelves, but something we can see in our daily lives. Just this week or late last week, I spoke with two former students who this would describe. So today's event is very crucial, and we hope that we can heighten the awareness of these issues. In Jamaica alone, 91% of disabled persons in a 2015 survey indicated that they were unemployed. In 2017, the Commission on Latin America and the Caribbean showed that up to 90% of the population of persons with disabilities is unemployed. Now, this is unacceptable. Most importantly, persons with disabilities need to have meaningful work and be represented in our societies. They need access to modern technology, but this is not the case in many Caribbean countries. In fact, if we look at access to social media, very few of us have a social media penetration rate above 50%. The cost of technology, of devices, is also prohibitive. Today's side event is spearheaded by none other than Senator Dr. Floyd Morris, who heads the Center for Disability Studies at the university, and who, in today's capacity in particular, is a member of the Committee of Persons with Disabilities. He has held this role since 2020 and is one of 18 persons worldwide to represent these issues within the United Nations program. Since we have a tight schedule, I will keep my comments just here and warmly welcome Dr. Floyd Morris, my colleague and friend, to set us off on the right foot for this event. Dr. Morris, over to you.
Hello, a pleasant good afternoon, Dr. Vassiani, and let me also express my profound gratitude and appreciation to all the individuals who have joined to participate and share in this very special side event, which is a part of the UN Conference of State Parties 2022 activities. And I want to also welcome my fellow who form an eminent panel from the Caribbean to lead out on this very important discussion. The overarching theme for Conference of States Parties 2022 is building disability inclusive and participatory in the COVID context and beyond. And there are a number of sub-themes for the conference, but the two that are particularly relevant for this afternoon side event, the two are innovation and technology, advancing disability rights, and sub-theme 2, economic empowerment and entrepreneurship of persons with disabilities. And extrapolating from the overarching theme and sub-themes, we have merged two of the sub-themes, come up with a theme for this afternoon's discussion that is entitled Eradicating the Tensions, Maximizing the Potential of Persons with Disabilities through Technology and Employment in the Post-COVID-19 era in the Caribbean. And I am very excited about this particular theme. And I am going to be leading out the discussion looking at the whole situation of the tensions that are to be found within the Caribbean based on the different models of disabilities that are being implemented and its effects on stymieing the advancement of persons with disabilities in terms of employment and access to technology. Now I want to start the conversation by pointing out that there are different models of disabilities that have been developed over the years, and these perspectives have been formulated by scholars and advocates in the community of persons with disabilities based on the lived and researched experience of persons with disabilities. And for the purpose of this presentation, I'm going to just draw on four of those models: the charity model, the medical model, the social model, and the human rights model of disability. Basically, the a charity model is looking at persons with disabilities from a welfare perspective. It basically views persons with disabilities in a negative light, that persons with disabilities have nothing meaningful to offer to society, and as such, they have to depend on their family, the state, or the church for welfare support. And this model has contributed to the retardation of the progress of persons with disabilities over the years. The medical model is what I regard as the brother, or dependent on where you're taking it from, the sister to the charity model of disability. And it basically emphasizes on the disease that has contributed to the impairment of the individual. And so a great emphasis is placed on curing the disease, because they believe that if you can cure the disease affecting the person with the impairment, then it would ease the problem that the person with impairment has. Now, so a lot of emphasis is placed on medical treatment, and hence the reference to it as the medical model. But one of the big shortcomings of the medical model is that not all impairments are formulated by some form of disease. You might have an accident that contributes to an individual developing a disability, and having an accident is certainly not a disease. And certainly, if an individual has an impairment, it doesn't mean that it's the disease contributing to the impairment. That person is not able to function in society. So take, for example, I am blind, I have glaucoma, but irrespective of that, I am able to function once I get the requisite support. Then you have the more progressive models of disability in the social model and the human rights model. The social model persons with disabilities, a disability arises in that context where the social factors contribute to a restriction of the participation of the individual in society on an equal basis with others. So it is looking at institutions and infrastructural deficiencies that contributes to the restriction of the participation of persons with disabilities in society. And the social model really has set the tone for a radical transformation from the charity-based and medical model approaches to disability, and has impacted significantly on the global landscape where persons with disabilities are concerned. The human rights approach, which emerged primarily during the time of the development of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, in that whilst human rights has been around for years, the model came to prominence where persons with disabilities are concerned in 2006, when the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities was adopted by the United Nations. And the model basically states that, you know, persons with disabilities have rights just as anyone else. It views persons with disabilities as human beings, and therefore they are subject to the fundamental rights and freedom that are entrenched in the various international treaties. And these rights were reaffirmed in the CRPD 2006. I must point out that the CRPD 2006 is not, it never prescribed any new rights, but reaffirmed the fundamental rights that were established by the United Nations Charter from as far back as 1948. Now, what we have learned from the situation in the Caribbean is that for centuries, over 300 years, Caribbean countries have been subject to what we call European hegemony. They were ruled by European countries, and a particular development model was fashioned in the region and deeply entrenched in the over that period of time were the charity and medical models of disability. And so you look across region institutions in the Caribbean were inaccessible. Schools, healthcare facilities, etc. All of those were inaccessible. And also the attitude towards persons with disabilities were negative. And this is reflected in how persons with disabilities are treated in the labor market example. So, as I articulated the view that the medical model and the charity-based model stipulate that, persons with disabilities should be confined to their homes. So they are not expected to be in the workplace. And you're not going to find these individuals as a result having access to modern technologies, because modern technologies are extremely expensive and these individuals are not able to work to purchase the modern technologies. So what we see happening in the Caribbean now is now that all the countries in the Caribbean have signed and ratified the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And they have a duty based on international law to implement these provisions. They are conflicting with the existing culture within Caribbean society, because the charity model and the medical model are deeply entrenched in the Caribbean society. It is what shapes the attitude towards persons with disabilities. It is how we socialize individuals in social institutions towards persons with disabilities. And so now here comes the human rights model as reaffirmed in the CRPD upon this culture. And so you can recognize the tension where persons with disabilities are concerned in terms of accessing employment. We are currently, based on data from ECLAC study, 80 to 90% of persons with disabilities in the region being unemployed. And then you have less than 10% of the individuals within the region having access to modern technology. And there was a recent study that was published by the World Health Organization and UNICEF in May of this year, which has pointed out that there are serious disparities and inequities between persons with disabilities living in the global north and the global south. The study showed that over 85% of persons with disabilities in the global north, that is America, Canada, the UK, Europe, have access to modern assistive technology. Whereas between 3 and 10%, a high of 10 and a low of 3% of the population in developing countries, the global south, have access to modern assistive technology. Now, there is a connection, a strong connection with the progress of persons with disabilities and the employment of persons with disabilities and modern technologies, because it is the modern technology that is needed to integrate, to include persons with disabilities in the labor market. And where there is the absence of the modern technology, it is going to problems in terms of these individuals accessing employment. And that is a contributing factor to the high levels of unemployment in the Caribbean. And at the base of this, if we are going to correct that problem, the models of disability that are used to drive public policies and programs have to be fundamentally changed so that persons with disabilities can be included in the mainstream of Caribbean society. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Morris. for enlightening us on those different approaches to disabilities. The first two, the charity and medical, being very limited in scope, and some progress being made with social and the human rights model. As you speak about the human rights model, I reflect on the situation of elections in the Caribbean. We have in the Caribbean had 9 elections since the start of the pandemic, and the majority of them have not had local or international observers. But what we do know is that the status of preparation and facilities for persons with disabilities in these elections have not been where they should be. We know that there are facilities that might be put in place to assist persons with reduced mobility. There are some basic physical facilities that should be put in place, such as ramps, stencils for visually impaired persons. And the Caribbean is also lagging behind in these areas that allow persons with disabilities to exercise their franchise independently. Because as you rightly say, there is no need to treat persons as charity cases. There is no need to treat persons as if they are in need of being cured. So as you spoke about those issues, I reflected that in the area of democracy, in the area of making sure that our elections are inclusive, that this is something that Caribbean countries need to work on. Without further ado, I would like to welcome our next speaker, who is Dr. Aubrey Webson. Dr. Webson, ambassador as well, is the permanent representative of Antigua and Barbuda to the United Nations. Ambassador Webson has a distinguished career in academia, has training in constitutional and criminal law, business management, has training from the University of the West Indies, and has also had a distinguished diplomatic career. We welcome Dr. Webson to speak to us about the situation of technology and how this affects persons with disabilities in our region. If Dr. Webson is ready to present and hearing me, please let me know. I know he is online. If you give us a minute, we will see how soon we can get Dr. Webson online to share his perspectives with us.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, loud and clear, and we are also seeing you. Thank you for joining us.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. I was trying to reconnect. Thank you very much for the introduction. And I want to begin by thanking my dear friend and brother, Dr. Morris, for inviting me to join this discussion. and for the colleagues and friends and leadership at UWI for putting this together. For some time, we have been speaking about technology in different ways and its transformative impact on the lives of persons with disabilities. And the time has come when we have to ask some further hard questions about access and how this works. I want to, however, not just simply address the question of technology, but to link it to the realities of life within the Caribbean and within our global community, and to associate that with persons with disabilities. I have, looked at the 17 SDGs and have linked at least 11 of those SDGs to persons with disability, and to connecting to see how we can achieve what the promise we made in 2015 of leaving no one behind. So I want to spend a little time just to speak to 4 of those and to link those to technology and to the issues that we face. I do not just want to tie it to COVID-19, because COVID-19, we are in the process, we hope, of recovering from that. But there are certain things and truths in the Caribbean that we will live with for a while yet, like climate change. And that too affects the lives of persons with disability. We are also now experiencing the challenge of food insecurity based on other global events that will affect the lives of persons with disability. So allow me to link SDG 1, dealing with poverty, because simply persons with disabilities in the Caribbean or otherwise are amongst the poorest people in the globe and are affected most by many of the global hardships and challenges we face, such as climate change, such as food insecurity, and so on. Let's also look at SDG 3, because the linking the issue of health. And I want to deal with this health sector and how we might address that with technology to advance persons with disabilities' lives, either in employment or generally. And then we can very quickly touch on SDG 4 relating to education, and then on decent unemployment down on SDG 8. I am not omitting generally, but for this particular event, I will skip the natural linkage of SDG 5 on gender and the SDG 7 and so forth. So, we can ask ourselves, has technology transformed the lives of persons with disability anywhere and everywhere? And the answer is yes. Technology has transformed our lives in many, many ways. The question is, for us in the Caribbean, are we accessing or able to access technology, and are our governments and the private sector, civil society, accessing these to be able to maximize the strength of persons with disability in our society? My friend, Dr. Morris has already spoken of the various models, and it's in the models' impact on our culture and how that impacts how we deal with persons with disability. The truth is, we have to mobilize technology in order that persons with disability are better able to participate inclusively in our society. So the communication mechanism that we have today that allow persons with hearing impairment to be able to access society's communications and to participate in the conversation in society are better than at any time in history. And we ought to, while we may not always have the top of the line hearing assistance equipment, and while we should have those, if we can get them to be available, there are simple things such as using how we use our smartphones and so on to allow us to communicate better. And we need to deploy what we have in order to move forward to get what we want and need. So I believe that, that it is important that we train all of our health workers in our health establishments in order to allow them to be able to better communicate with our persons with disabilities, whether it's hearing impairment or otherwise, so that we can use the technology that is available and we can then allow persons to be brought more fully into society. Similarly, there are significant improvements in technology in mobility aids for persons with physical disability. And again, the question is, are we using it? Because we know, if we see in the Caribbean, people are still struggling with mobility aids that were made, 50 years ago? But we have to begin to look at how we can, as a society, access more modern aid, and not just for an institution, but for the people on the street in the everyday, because that's how we are going to change society, and that's how we are going to create opportunities. Because I assure you that access to technology allows for access to jobs and access to equal participation within society. If we are going to address the question of poverty, then we have to address the question of how do we provide persons with disability with the kind of aid, technological aid that will allow them to be able to be better farmers, better trade persons, or better entrepreneurs. And how do we train people to use the technology that can allow them to be able to participate more equally? And we have to find these. Floyd spoke, Dr. Morrison spoke of issue of technology that is available in the North and that is not available in the global South. We in the global South have to begin now to put our heads together and begin to come up with appropriate tools that will allow us to be able to begin to address some questions. Because in Africa, in Kenya, and I spent a lot of my career in Africa, Africa had a jump start on the global South in allowing access to finance by farmers and so on. They had a jump start on the global North, in allowing through their different models using cell phones to allow farmers in rural communities to be able to bring their things to the market much easier. And the whole question of mobile financing in the South, in Africa, was far ahead of mobile financing in the so-called North. And we know that, and it is things like that that we now have to put our shoulders together and begin to come up with in helping persons with disability and our society to begin to transform lives. We already saw in the chat here this afternoon some figures from ILO and how that referred to the GDP and what we are missing when we do not bring persons with disability into society. It's not going to change if we just talk about it. It has to change if we act on it. Similarly, we have made some grounds in education. We know that education has probably been the best equalizer or closest to an equalizer for persons with disability in our society. It's not, the issue is after formal education, then what? And or informal sectors, then what? And how do we transform those to make sure that persons with disability can access and benefit? And that's what leads us into decent work. Because too often we are comfortable in settling for substandard, low income work for persons with disability, because we're not looking about work, we're thinking about giving us something to do, not to find decent work. And we have to change that in our society, but we have to also change that amongst ourselves as persons with disability, so that we too are not settling for less than we believe we ought to get and ought to have like every other person. And we know the struggle in our society and especially in the current era, the struggle on employment amongst everybody. Well, we can create, with access to the right type of technology, we can create a niche for ourselves that will allow persons with disability to be able to find a place within the sector, because there is an opportunity here. And we have to look at what opportunities are available and how then we use technology. So my last point before I sum up is access. Access to technology is our biggest challenge. The cost of technology, even in the global north, is outrageous. And most persons in employment, I feel sure I could say this, that most persons in employment in the global north who with disabilities have their technology that they have that all is in some way subsidized by the governments, whether it's local government or federal governments within their countries. Because the cost of technology, which is measured against the economic cost of developing the technology itself, and it's a pure numbers game within a capitalist market society. It's a pure numbers game. Doesn't allow our technology for persons with disability to be cheap. It is hugely expensive to develop, and we know that transformation has to come, and in order to bring these down on its subsidies. We know that things like the iPhone, the Apple equipment, did a humongous job several years ago by making Apple accessible. And I'm not promoting Apple more than any other smartphone. There are other smartphones who do the same. I only say Apple because I have one. Now, where these things are now being made not just for persons with disability, but they are accessible to everybody. And they're accessible out the box, which is most important. So you don't have to go and buy specialized additional add-ons. And we need to see that in more equipment. We need to see that in more aids, mobility aids, etc., so that persons can get it can help to bring the price down and begin to make things a little more accessible to persons with disability. We need the support and the subsidies from government because, as I said earlier, amongst the poorest peoples in our society are persons with disability. So if I am to summarize the 4 things that I wanted you to think about, is communication aids, so that we can be aware of we can get information on all of the important things that life throws up to all members of society, whether it is in the health sector, it is in climate change, or whether it is simply access through with communication aid that will allow me to work and participate in society more equally. Access then on poverty and SDG 1, and the issue that, again, with food security, better opportunities for helping persons to access, whether it is accessing resources, whether it is accessing the technology that will allow us to identify things. And by the way, let me make a plug and say kudos to the Eastern Caribbean for making their currency more easily accessible, for persons who are blind and low vision, but also for persons based on persons with other forms of disability, including intellectual disability. So I say kudos on that. And then education, well, we know the need for technology and access in education, and we have been speaking on that one. But decent work relies heavily on access, and we ought to set the example within having, as Dr. Morris noted, having signed on to all of these treaties, etc. We ought to set some examples about finding opportunities and subsidizing equipment that will allow persons with disability to be brought into our society. And I thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Dr. Webson. You have given us much to think about, and as both you and Dr. Morris have highlighted, we want to be practical and proactive about many of these issues of access to technology, issues of access to employment. As we speak about access to employment, I would like to acknowledge the presence of both Mr. Shavane Daly and Mr. Jason Ricketts, who are former students of mine, who are quite qualified and possibly quite underemployed at the moment, if we are speaking about taking practical steps for our community. Thank you again, Dr. Webson. Now, as we have a short program, I will keep my introductions and my other personal interjections to a limit. I see Professor Dr. Morris scratching his head because he knows I can get into issues such as, you spoke, Dr. Webson, about technology and access to technology, and I'm restraining myself from speaking about gifts and donations that sometimes NGOs provide that are outdated technology or inappropriate technology for our use, or sometimes it can be technology that we cannot afford to maintain. And I think about a former student of mine who was gifted a wheelchair that had a battery that didn't work. So, there are so many issues that we can speak about here today. In the interest of time, I will restrain myself and invite our next speaker, Mrs. Gloria Goff. Mrs.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good evening to others in the Caribbean, the rest of the world. I'm Gloria Goff, and I'm here to speak with you today about the situation with employment and persons with disabilities. I believe there is sufficient evidence today that socio-economic integration of persons with disabilities is not only a question of social justice and a right, but also the best solution in terms of social costs and benefits. Access to employment is therefore the most cost-effective way to reduce poverty and empower the lives of persons with disabilities. According to an Economic Commission of Latin America and the Caribbean, which is ECLAC report, over 1 million persons with disabilities reside in the Caribbean. And of those able to work, 85% are unemployed. This high level of unemployment is often attributed to lack of adequate academic and vocational skills, attitudinal and infrastructural barriers,
Hi, we're not
Hello?
hearing you. I don't know if you're hearing me, but I can't hear any.
I am hearing you. I'm hearing you, Aubrey.
Right,
Lisa,
but we're
are
not
you
hearing the
hearing me?
speakers. We're
Hello,
not,
are you hearing me now?
yes.
Yes, I'm hearing you now, Gloria.
Did you stop hearing me from the beginning?
No, we heard you when
Okay.
you up to when you spoke about the data from ECLAC. I'm talking about the 85% unemployment.
Yes.
Okay, that's where it stopped.
That's
Okay,
very
all right.
early in your speech. Yes.
All right. The ECLAC study on disability in the Caribbean states that disabled persons have the right to economic and social security and to a decent level of living. They have the right, according to their capabilities, to secure and retain employment or to engage in a useful, productive, and remunerative occupation. And I was saying, although this principle is rights-based and theoretically sound, employment data, empirical or anecdotal, do not reflect significant adherence to that. And I'm looking now at a 2016 labor market survey conducted in Jamaica, which indicates that persons who are deaf were employed in the largest number of occupations, while persons with intellectual impairment were employed in a few elementary occupations. Between 50 and 55% of the employers in each sector were willing to employ persons with disability, with the wholesale and retail sector seeming to offer the most hope. Manufacturing and education were next with 11 and 10.3% respectively, while there were few opportunities in the electricity, gas, water, mining, quarrying, and public administration sectors, which had a combination, a total of less than 1%. Of those employed, 72% were engaged on a full-time basis and 13% part-time. And among the industries, the government was the largest employer of persons with disability, but unfortunately, this did not amount to 3%. Despite this, there are no placement officers, job coaches, or transition officers in the public sector with the direct responsibility for the job placement of persons with disabilities. The picture in other islands are, in the most part, similar. The data resulting from a survey done in Trinidad and Tobago indicates that 17.9% of persons with disability actually had a job and worked, and only 19.9% of those employed had jobs that required technical or tertiary education. In addition, 57% of those who were working were employed in jobs that required low levels of education. And this reflects another factor that is highly linked to economic opportunity, and that is the level of education. The low level of employment of persons with disabilities in the Caribbean is further supported by informal surveys in Barbados, which suggested that of the 10 to 12,000 persons with disabilities in the country, an estimate of less than 5% were gainfully, notice I said gainfully employed by government. In a regional survey as well, persons with physical disabilities in that same country, they felt that the private sector was more willing to employ them than the public sector. A Pan American Health Organization report, and we're moving to Guyana, and this was some time ago, indicated that Guyana population was it had about 800,000 persons. 9% of those are persons with disability. So a survey was done with 1,485 or 3%, and 70% of those were employed. 46% being self-employed of that amount, 47% being self-employed, and 29% were employed in the private sector. There were groups of respondents who said that they were employed in semi-skilled or unskilled areas. 40% had lost their job as a result of acquiring their disability. 47% were of unemployed persons said they were willing to work, but they needed training and assistance in order to do so. A few occupy, in terms of the persons with disabilities who worked with the government, a few of them occupied mid-level positions. In St. Vincent and the Grenadines, now a report on their human rights 2018 report, revealed that the NGOs believe that there was subtle discrimination in the hiring practices of companies and places in St. Vincent. However, they also believe that the government was making a special effort to ensure that persons with disabilities were employed, especially those in the those in the public sector. A lot has happened, since then, and people in St. Lucia and St. Vincent and other countries had similar experiences in terms of the employment sector. Programs such as youth employment, that takes place in St. Lucia. But for Antigua, the report for 2021 and 2022 so far indicates a total different picture. It says that 10% of persons with disabilities were unemployed in 2021 and 7.9% in 2022. Now, I think that could be the highest in the region in terms of, lowest in the region in terms of unemployment. The evidence from these countries is indicative of a region that seems not to be sufficiently focused on the economic independence of persons with disabilities. Let us compare the Caribbean now with global trends. In keeping with global trends, the Caribbean countries make provisions, though very limited, for the welfare of persons who are unemployed or who are low-income earners. In Jamaica, this support is available through the Program of Advancement through Health and Education path and the Economic Empowerment Grant Program. And like Barbados, St. Lucia, and a number of other countries in the region, the National Insurance Scheme, where they benefit through the invalidity pensions, or in some countries they have what is called disability pension. In contrast to countries like the US and the UK, other than constitutional provisions for equality for all, there are few anti-discrimination laws that specifically prohibit discrimination against persons with disabilities in employment. Also, unlike the more developed countries, wheelchair accessible buses services are limited, with only a few countries having these types of transportation, and then they work at certain hours and limited hours and only operate in certain areas, especially when we think of Jamaica. Efforts on the part of countries to promote the rights to employment of persons with disabilities are similar in the region, with varying degrees of successes. Among efforts, we look at the increased public and private sector approach to assisting persons in, academic endeavors and vocational and professional training through scholarships and so on. Greater awareness and involvement of the private sector in the employment of persons with disabilities more admissions of persons with disabilities to training institutions, and so on. The challenge is that we are having persons trained and a few are being employed. Somebody might say it happens in the other sector, but the reality is it's more difficult for persons with disabilities. And we have quite a number of qualified persons, not necessarily just tertiary education, but qualified persons in a particular discipline or disciplines who find it so difficult to get employment. The genesis of a number of these actions came about before the advent of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, right? And a lot of the things happened, but the convention helped to propel persons, to push them to work towards changing this approach to dealing with persons with disabilities and employing persons with disabilities. Before I close, I should mention to you that you should focus on the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, Article 27, which in alignment with the principle of non-discrimination, participation, and inclusion, the CRPD is clear that states parties, that is countries, should employ persons with disabilities in the public sector. And they should also encourage the private sector to employ persons with disabilities, because persons with disabilities have a right to employment. Let me close by saying an accessible and inclusive labor market will ensure that all members of the society are catered to and have access to employable skills and have access to employment. We should be in that position so that we can compete equally with our citizens who are non-disabled. And we can take care of ourselves and our families. If we are not employed by the government or the public sector, they will be losing out because we have skills that they can benefit from. Our wanting to work is not just for occupational therapy. It's for ensuring that we can take care of ourselves, our families, our communities, and also contribute to nation building. Thank you.
Are you hearing me now? Okay.
Yes, we're hearing you.
Thank you so much. I was thanking Ms. Goff for her informative presentation. You provided for us crucial statistics on where individual Caribbean countries are in their commitments to persons with disabilities. You have shared with us the role of regional and international organizations in solidifying this commitment. So thank you. I want to acknowledge all the comments and the questions that are coming through in the chat. We will have a chance after our final presentation to ask questions, make comments, and be a bit more engaging with the presentations we have had so far. I would like to invite our final presenter for the evening, Dr. Armstrong Alexis. Dr. Alexis, I'm following you on Twitter now, and I agree with you that more people need to know who Lamin was, you know. It's a shame that persons over 40 or even under 40 do not know the George Lamming. Dr. Alexis comes to us via the CARICOM Secretariat. He is our Deputy Secretary General of CARICOM and will be sharing with us today on access to technology and employment for persons with disabilities in a post-pandemic world. Dr. Alexis, if you are there, welcome. We thought Dr. Alexis was with us. I know we saw him earlier. If you give us a minute or two, we will try to locate him so we can get his views.
Dr. Bastiani,
Yes, Dr. Morris.
I'm not seeing Dr. Alexis online, which
Right.
suggests that he might have been bumped off, you know. He's all the way down in Guyana. So I would suggest that we continue the discussion with question and answers. If he gets back online, then we will accommodate his presentation. But I suggest that we move ahead in the interest of time because, you know, we have a narrow band in terms of time.
Okay, and just to confirm, Dr. Morris, we are finishing, it's now 5:40, and we should be wrapping up by 6.
You're right.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I want to thank everyone for their engagement with us from the beginning of this important seminar. So welcome again to Ms. Hales, Ms. Aris Musa, Caleb Orozco, who spoke about Belize and 1.9 billion in GDP, but a commitment to investment of the full life cycle for persons with disability remains limited to the age of 16. And some more comments there. We have some insights from Christy Almeida on the International Labour Organization and the cost of excluding persons with disabilities from the workforce as a social problem that in the long run costs individual governments more. And there you have shared with us some statistics as well. We also have Mr. McLean, who has been sharing consistently throughout the presentations on the cost of technology, the cost of rail equipment, how proactive we need to be. We also have Mr. Orozco speaking about a program of subsidies and commendations for excellent presentations. And there are a number of other comments. So I'd like to open the floor now. If there is anyone, okay, so there is a question, if Ms. Goff is still hearing, from Stephen Barani, who says, crucial statistics, and thank you, Mrs. Goff. Are there any recent regional reports on the employment of persons with disabilities? So that's one question, if Ms. Goff is still hearing us. And there's another comment from Mr. McLean, who says he likes the rights-based approach, but without a facilitatory society, then the rights-based approach is in trouble. I absolutely agree with you on that. And if you could use the raise hand feature to indicate that you would like to say something, or if you have a comment or question, you may also type in the chat.
Yes, hello.
Yes.
Yes, in terms, this is Gloria again. In terms of the question of recent data, two things. Firstly, we must keep in mind that data on disabilities, it's not always available on time because of the fact that it's not, you don't find a lot of persons doing data on disabilities, and sometimes the data can be, the collection of the data, and by the time it comes out, it can be a little delayed. However, what I presented today was data in some areas up to 2021, 2020, 2018, 2016, and then the one for Guyana was a little bit more dated. There may be, because they apart from ECLAC, you have the World Bank, you have PAHO, you have the United Nations, you have the University of the West Indies producing data in different ways. And I think there is some information in terms of the disability index that was undertaken by the University of the West Indies Center for Disability Studies. And I might just defer to Senator Morris to speak about that data. The other issue before he speaks, has to do with the issue that Damian raised. And I agree with you wholeheartedly, Damian. And that is why I said, despite the rights-based approach, we are still having challenges. However, without the rights-based approach, if you move back to the medical model or to the medical model and those traditional welfare models, you would find yourself in a worst case scenario. So it would be best to have the rights-based approach and then advocate for the things to be put in place for it to be more meaningful.
Thank you very much, Ms. Goff. And Mr. McLean, I saw your comment regarding the use of technology, and you say, and I agree with you that we don't always have to receive equipment or facilities with the most up-to-date technology, and sometimes these older versions may bridge the gap. I absolutely agree with you on that. The specific thing I was speaking about, though, was a little different in that the gift that was made just didn't work at all. So that I agree with you that there is a room for secondhand, older things that will help developing countries to bridge the gap, to create more equity and accessibility. So I agree with you 100% there. Dr. Morris, you're muted.
Okay. Um, yes, Dr. Bastiani, and commendations to both Dr. Webster and Gloria for their excellent presentation. And just to indicate that I contacted Dr. Alexis, and they're having serious connection issues and still trying. So I don't know if Joshua or Francesca can see what they can do in terms of assisting them uh, from their end. But I just wanted to point out that, you know, it's all over the world, especially in the developed world where you have a high concentration of access to assistive technology. As I pointed out, the data is pointing about 85% based on World Health Organization and UNICEF recent study. Government has played a pivotal role in that regard. What government has done in these jurisdictions is to uh, establish policy that allows for a person with a disability to gain access to one piece of assistive technology, whether it be for educational or employment purposes, every 3 to 5 years. And a similar approach is needed in the Caribbean if it is that persons with disabilities are going to be able to access these technologies. Progressive policies must be put. You see, one of the things that we must understand, is that in any democratic state, it is the duty of governments to protect the marginalized and the most vulnerable. And we have established from time and time that persons with disabilities are amongst the most marginalized and vulnerable. So if you want to bring them back into, if you want to bring them into mainstream society, the government will have to lead the role, lead out in terms of that participation and inclusion. And this is where now policies for access to technology will have to play that pivotal role. And there are different ways and means in which it can be done, whether it be through the universal access funds that have been created by different administrations throughout the Caribbean after they had the liberalization of the telecommunications industry. They will have to play use those funds to empower groups like persons with a disability. And Aubrey spoke as well to the need for uh, localization of modern technologies, getting individuals within the Caribbean space to start focusing on developing assistive technologies for persons with disabilities in order to reduce the cost, because that is a major prohibitive factor in terms of access to the technology. And I believe that those two interventions I would want to make at this point in time.
I
Thank you.
wanted to.
Thank you, Dr. Morris. Who has the floor now?
Yeah, Dr. I wanted to make a comment because I was going to. This is Aubrey Webster.
Okay,
I was
Dr.
going-
Webster.
I was going to actually chime in on the last point that Dr. Morris made, where Floyd emphasized. I think in this day and age of technology and innovation, I think we have to think out the box a little bit. Certainly, the cost of technology for persons with disability is exceedingly high if you're buying it from the West. It's already high here I'm in New York usually. Right now I'm actually in the Caribbean. But the cost of technology in the North is high anyway. And I talked about a lot of employed persons being subsidized by government and or their private employer. So we have to, I think, in the Caribbean, we have two opportunities in transforming our societies. This is an opportunity for regional governments through CARICOM to begin to think and act together to either creating some sort of regional funding source or creating an opportunity for innovation and encouraging in the region some innovation amongst youth towards access technology and backing that industry with resources from within the region to begin to see how we can, as a region, address some of the questions of creating our own access technology and creating, therefore, using those to create opportunities. And we can look at our sectors, the strong sectors in our region, where employment best, most available for persons with disability, as Gloria pointed out, a number of areas, and to look at then where do we start to create the access. And looking again, if you linked the health sector, the need for communication access, and the need for specialized mobility aids and other aids. If you looked at employment, if you look at education, there's certainly a number of areas for children and for young people and adults, young adults, that we can. So what I'm saying is that we can use the opportunity, one, for a regional approach, because we know the cost for any individual grouping is large because the numbers of persons with disability are relatively small by our population standards. If we break them down by islands, if we left it as a regional thing, we know the number is large, million, as Gloria said, within Latin America and the Caribbean, and a million plus. And therefore, we have to begin to think regionally, and more importantly, innovation. We are at a period, I mentioned how Africa stole the march on finance, mobile financing, to involve poor farmers so that they began to be able to be more directly involved. We have to steal the march, and we have to begin to find a way. So I thought I would throw that out so that we can begin to think outside of the box, because of the issues we are facing as a region and as a people with disability in this region.
Thank you very much, Dr. Webson. We have comments, some reactions to what you have said. Mr. McLean is asking, what's the tax on the Caribbean lottery you're for? Need a piece of that. He says, I know that Miss Sanchia Hales had her hand up at one time. Do you still wish to speak, Miss Hales? If our organizers could unmute her so she could share. Sanchia Hales. Her hand was raised earlier.
Oh, good afternoon or evening. Okay, so hi everyone. Great discussion and great contribution by my fellow colleagues, I will call them. So we're speaking about technology and employment, but I was thinking it is good to, have us as persons with disability having the access to technology. But I was thinking how many persons actually know how to use it, or have the proper training to monitor it.
Okay, would any of our presenters like to take that? Ms. Hales says, yes, it's important to have technology, but how many persons actually have the training and the know-how to interface with this technology?
So I'll make a comment on that. So I think the young lady is starting from the 10 feet pole. She's starting from very high up and starting that with existing modern technology that are out there. We don't have to. Technology does not necessarily only mean a piece of fancy computer equipment. It may mean a new piece of mobility aid. It may mean a new piece of technology that we have created or it's available that you can use for communication and so on. And then you have to learn. How many of us knew anything 5 years ago about the access of an iPhone and how you could use that to within, for speech and so on? We learned it. So it really isn't rocket science to learn. So I think all of us can learn and all of us will learn if we had to learn in order to find opportunities for ourselves, if it were around us. So I wouldn't be scared by that, is what I'm saying.
Okay, I agree with you, Dr. Webster. Even if I still cannot use my mother's iPhone, she does a much better job at it than
but your mom can, right? And she's older than you, and she learned
considerably. So she gets it, and anyone.
That's right. So. That's right.
I just want to say, Dr. Versiani, to my colleague with disabilities, not to view it from that perspective, because once you get the technology, your natural instinct is going to draw you to the technology, and you're going to find a way to use it. Say, for example, you have the Jamaica Society for the Blind, you have the Jamaica Association for the Deaf that I know give training support in these areas. So, that is not the major issue where the technology is concerned, because a lot of these technologies are user-friendly as well. I mean, they are being built as such, where you have the problem now is the cost. And I want to encourage persons with disabilities, that wherever they see the training opportunity, wherever they see the educational opportunity, make sure that they equip themselves with it. Because, I mean, the fact of the matter, notwithstanding the challenges that we are having in the Caribbean in terms of accessing services and technologies and so for persons with disabilities, we're venturing into a new epoch, and you're gonna see the transformation taking place over time, because as more and more Caribbean countries establish legislation to foster the rights of persons with disabilities, you're gonna see the changes taking place. And I say to my disabled colleagues, don't wait until then to get trained. Don't wait on them to get an education and say, boy, we can't afford the technology. So, don't make no sense we do anything. Just prepare yourself. The opportunity will come and you will grab it with both hands.
Thank you, Dr. Morrison. There are persons in the chat agreeing with you that training is not a significant barrier, if it is at all, and that training is accessible. I will acknowledge one more question from Annetta Reed. You go ahead, please.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, good afternoon.
Okay, great. This is Robert Blake. My question to everyone, the challenge that we have is not necessarily learning the technology. The technology is there, and as Dr. Senator Floyd said, is that we can capitalize on the training and support by other groups. But my question is, can a legislation by us within the community be passed that the equipments that we need, such as the smartphone, the tablet, whatever, the AI by itself, the laptop, can we have some sort of policies that waive whenever we are purchasing these devices as persons with disability for us to be able to use it? Because we know in the Caribbean, especially in Jamaica, anywhere you go now, a laptop for a blind person, in all honesty, it's over 100,000 and going. No, not many of us can, by rights or truth to be told, afford the technology. Can we foster any relationship with those persons who are people within the manufacturing company that will allow us to get these equipment at a very discounted rate? And hopefully when we're able to take it in or carry it here, our government or our system not turn around again and charge us almost what we actually pay for it. What can be done regarding us getting these type of equipment for us as persons living with disability within the Caribbean?
Okay, thank you for the question. Which one of our presenters would Dr. Webson, Dr. Morris, or Ms. Goff like to respond to that? How do we implement legislation to discount technological devices or to remove duty on some of these devices? Someone is responding that just before you jump on, Dr. Morris, that it is already done through Ministry of Finance, and the NGO Carla Aris Musa says it's already done. Belize has duty exemption for devices for those who are blind, and Ms. Hospital Dallas says persons with disabilities need to see themselves as vessels of change. You can be advocates for the change you want to see. You come together, you can mountains and get governments to respond to your needs. So, Dr. Morris.
Well, I mean, since I have many hats, I must say that the latter point there that was made is really a powerful point, because in any democratic society, persons with disabilities constitute a significant minority group, with World Health Organization estimates pointing to between 15 to 17% of country's population having a disability. And when you should add family members to that, you see the numbers increasing exponentially. And so there is a lot of value that can be gained when the population of persons with disabilities come together in terms of a powerful lobby group to advocate for issues affecting them. And, I would say that in terms of the Caribbean, the issues that are of fundamental priority to persons with disabilities: access to modern technology, employment, education, healthcare, housing, and dealing with the negative attitude and stigma relating to persons with disabilities are significant issues that the community need to strengthen and insist that governments and the society as a whole deals with. Robert, I mean, there are a number of countries across the Caribbean that governments have waived the duty on the different technologies for persons with disabilities. But again, notwithstanding that waiver, the cost is still there because when you look at the laptops and the the tablets that we have to purchase, they are still expensive. The base issue is that a lot of persons with disabilities in the region are extremely poor. And so they don't have the money to purchase the technology. So how you gonna deal with that is there must be some institutional mechanism from the state to respond to that, since the technology is so important to the advancement and inclusion of persons with disabilities in society. And that is why I am stressing and emphasizing that governments within the region must formulate programs and policies that are going to be geared towards bringing persons with disabilities in the mainstream of society, because these are amongst your most marginalized population, and the duty of government is to protect the most vulnerable and marginalized.
Let me make 3 quick points before we close.
Okay, Dr. Webson.
Thank you. Let me make 3 quick points based on Robert's question and the comments that are coming through the box. And Floyd made reference to 2 of them. So firstly, yes, indeed, there are many countries in the region, many island nations, where government waive duty and so on equipment. But these are specialized equipment. It's very difficult if you're buying a regular computer for government to waive duties on those things, for them to be guaranteed that, and I'm speaking now as wearing a hat as a government employee, senior government employee, for government to know that it is going to go to a person with disability. So governments will always be reluctant. But most crucially, they are for specialized equipment. However, one of the things we want to do is to, as they say, up the level and look at universal designs that will then move things forward so that it becomes more available to more people. Regardless to what, the last point that Boyd made about poverty and persons with disability and poverty is critical. And I would like us to think again, it would seem to me that disability in our region has in some ways slipped off the government agenda, the heads of government agenda. So, and while we are making small steps, I think it might be very important as we close on the 2030 agenda and the SDGs, which is only 8 years away before we end this, that we and our colleagues who are from CARICOM secretaries who are listening, that we ask them to put on the heads of government agenda the whole question of disability and some of these issues that we're raising now, so that we can put together a 5, 10, 20-point plan to see if the Caribbean could truly respond to leaving no one behind, and how are we going to do that. And if we can, because the objective here is to get it back in the conversation at the highest level. I think it might have slipped by because some person with disability might now be seen a little more visible, but it doesn't change the lives of the majority of us.
Just to say, Aubrey, that the issue of disability received some attention from the heads a couple years ago, which led to the establishment of the Declaration of Patientville, which is a document outlining basically the roadmap from the Caribbean standpoint where persons with disabilities are concerned.
Right.
And when you conflate that now with the CRPD,
right.
we have documents that would lead to the development of persons with disabilities in the region.
Right.
I agree with you that the issue needs to be brought back on the agenda, because it is 9 years since the declaration of Patientville, and CARICOM has to look back at what has been taking place since then, and in light of the fact that we are 8 years away from the SDGs, where do we go? What grounds do we need to make up in order to put persons with disabilities in on a development path within the region? So, I'm agreeing with you, but just to also point out that there is the Declaration of Patientville that has been adopted in the region.
No, I understood that, and I agree with that, and that's the point I was making. The Declaration of Pétionville, similar to the SDGs thing, was in 2013. The SDG was 2015. So we need to look back and say, and the CARICOM needs to get it back on the agenda. What have we done? And we can use two vehicles to do that. One is the SDGs, and that one of the things we can ask is every Caribbean island that presents its VNR to the SDG should explain in their VNR where is the situation with persons with disability, in order that no one is left behind. And the second thing is the human rights report that every country gives every couple of years should also explain in those reports what is the situation with persons with disability. And our heads should make that mandatory as we close in on 2030. And to do that, we have to get it back on the table. We know that Pétionville was done. 10 years coming up next year, we could look back 10 years, and CARICOM Secretariat should help us to do that.
Okay, right. Thank you, Dr. Webson. I see Dr. Morris checking his watch, which means the time is upon us. I see you checking. So I will give you the final word, Dr. Morris. So before, I would like to thank all our guests on Zoom, all our guests on live on YouTube. Some of them have sent comments, and this has been a very engaging conversation. Dr. Morris, I think we need to have more of these, because there's so much our guests have to say. There is even one person with their hand still up. So I think we need more opportunities like this to speak about issues of technology, education, employment for persons with disabilities. And I thank you again for creating this space to have this conversation. I thank presenters, Dr. Webson, Ms. Goff, and yourself for presenting on these issues. There is one question, if Dr. Morris, do we have the time to take a question?
Yes, just do it quickly.
Okay, Kavian Moran has a question. Go ahead. I am not sure where she went. Go ahead, please.
The person lowered their hand.
Yes, are you hearing me? Are you hearing me?
Your connection is poor, but go ahead quickly. I'm sorry, we're not hearing you clearly. So
Yes. I would like some other advice, please.
we're not hearing you clearly.
I would like some advice. Hello.
Yes, we're hearing you now. Go ahead.
Yes, I was saying like some advice. Um, my situation is I've been applying for a job for a year now. Um, I'm a qualified counselor. I am a qualified counselor, however, I am physically challenged. How do I go about getting employment? Because whether I state that I'm in a when I state that I'm in a wheelchair, I don't get calls. And when I leave out the fact that I'm physically challenged or have any sort of disability, I get called for an interview.
Dr. Morris, Miss
All
Goff.
right. I'm gonna suggest that she contact the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities. I know that they are going through a transitional phase now, but in short order, they should be up and running, and there are different ways and means that the JCPD can assist in that regard. And there's also opportunities for self-employment through the various initiatives at the JCPD. But I would suggest that you contact the JCPD, make sure that you're also registered with them, so that you can access the services. And this is a new JCPD that is being created under the Disabilities Act. All right. So I would suggest that you contact the JCPD. All right.
Thank you, Dr. Morris. And there's a suggestion that she explore telehealth as an option to provide her services. So without further ado, I would like to thank everyone for attending today, for presenting. Thank you for your questions and your comments, both in the chat and online. And please look out for more of these opportunities to discuss issues pertinent to persons with disabilities and how we can find solutions. Thank you very much and have a good evening.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Vassiani, and thanks for ably chairing the program. Thanks to all the participants and to my co-presenters, Dr. Aubrey Webson, Ms. Gloria Goff, and Dr. Armstrong Alexis, who tried, he was on at one point in time, but just got bumped off because of the technology. And I am deeply grateful to the support team from the Faculty of Social Sciences, Francesca Lloyd McDavid, and Ms. Joshua Bell for their guidance and their support. We are really grateful. Thanks to Uno all for come and join we in this discussion here. Respect due to all our Uno.
And thank you to you, Dr. Morris, for leading the discussion and these opportunities as usual, so many different ways.
Blessing, blessing.
Okay. Bye, everybody. Have a good evening.
Thank you, guys. Have a good one.